Thanks everyone. I know this is, people always say the session after lunch is going to be the toughest session, right? So I wanted to sort of take this as a challenge. What's the point talking about empathy if I can't be empathetic myself to my own audience, right? So no drab stuff, no monologues, 5 examples, 5 distillations, and then we'll just talk about, uh, you know, some learnings that I've had, right? So before I start off, I wanted to sort of, on the topic of empathy, right? How many of you have been to a funeral, right? When someone's died, right? So I'm sure every one of you. But how many of you have actually carried something for the grieving family to eat, right? When you're attending someone who's passed away, right? So if you've grieved yourself, you'd probably know though those days are extremely long, arduous and tough. You can't go and cook something in the kitchen. You can't socially. It's absurd for you to order on a Swiggy or a Zomato, but you still have to eat, right? It's a real need, right? I wasn't perceptive to this insight until my mother told me, right? A few years back, I had gone to some. I said, "What did you do about it?" Right? Okay, fine. Anyone can be sympathetic, right? We mistake virtue signaling. That we went to somebody's house, we sort of grieved with them, we felt bad about it, and then posted on social media as a sign that we're empathetic. We're not. You have to live through that person's life, find out what that person is actually going through. What's the singular big pain point that that person has, and see if you can do something about it, right? I know this sounded brutal, this experience, right? But you'd be surprised this actually gets touched upon in Sheryl Sandberg's book as well. That when she lost her husband, out of all people in Facebook or wherever she was working, lots of people came and said, "Hey, I feel so sorry about it, blah, blah, blah." She said it was only her neighbor, right? And a simpleton at that, who just sort of handed her over a bacon or a sandwich or whatever, right, through the back door and said, "Hey, you guys must be famished. I know you got a family of 2, you yourself must be going through a lot. Just make sure you slip out, go to a unseen place, nourish yourself, because you're going to have long days ahead," right? So why am I bringing this up? No one can teach you empathy, right? You can be empathetic only if you hold the other person's life as a thread in your head, right? So I'll just walk you through some examples that I've sort of seen. The idea is really to sort of make this easy, visual. I always have this sort of feeling that it's the anecdotal stories that stick out in your mind long after all this theory and jargon and all of this stuff get done, right? So first question, what's the context? I just gave you an example of what the context is, right? Normally, for 99% of humans who are well off, food is not something that you have to worry about. But all of us go through situations at least once or twice a year when it's difficult for you to locate food. And not because you can't afford it, because the social circumstances are such that you can't probably do it, right? Maybe you're with somebody who's fasting, right? It happens in quite a few religions. You don't want to be the one who's sort of hogging in front of him, right? So what's the context, right? So this is a bit of shooting my own organization in the foot, but there's nothing better than self-deprecating humor to start this off, right? So we have this whatever HR tool, blah, 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 every time we log in the morning, right, it says, "How are you feeling today?" Right? So I'm going to pause here, right? Usually, when do people go to a HR tool? Sorry? Yeah. You certainly are not getting joy out of going to a HR tool. That much I can tell you. You're going there because someone's forcing you to fill up a Form 60, tax planning, because you think there's a discrepancy in on your salary, too much tax has been deducted. Hey, dude, I want to get on with what I need to. Please ask me this question after my problem is solved. Right? It's the equivalent of you asking a hungry person, "Do you want to buy an encyclopedia?" Right? And needless to say, right, rankings are very poor, right? Is this a good indication, for example, of mental health or general happiness? I'm asking you a question. What else could be a better context? Exactly. In fact, you're looking at a football scoreboard for counting cricket runs, right? What could be a more realistic, you know, view view of, let's say, employees' happiness, well-being, blah blah blah, whatever. I don't know the answer, so we'll collect some thoughts. That's the whole idea. See, it has to be a neutral state, right? Clearly, this is a dispossessed state, right? You can't also go and ask somebody after you've given them a 5-day free stay in Taj saying, how are you feeling today? I feel lovely, man. But I know I dread the thought of going back to office tomorrow, right? What could be a more neutral state? I don't know, I'm asking. Because it's easy to identify the problem, it's much tougher also to solve it, right? You get where I'm going from. Not that I have the answer. For the record, I have no idea. I'm also sort of figuring out, right? So I'm sort of trying to sort of figure out these guardrails. It can't be at the beginning of a day. It can't be at the end of a day. It can't be when the person is trying to address a problem, and hence his mind is working with the context of saying, let me get this done first, right? It can't be at the cafeteria. Why? Most gossip is negative. No one says, oh, I'm extremely well fed in this company, I'm well paid. Somebody is going to say, hey, that fellow left, he's got this job, etc., etc., right? So you ask people in a cafeteria, I can bet my loss back that this will be even worse. Why? Because there is social proofing. Here it's an individual activity, right? There, even if I'm sitting alone, I suspect someone's going to tell you stuff that I didn't even want to hear, right? So where else could you be? Where else could it be? Maybe you won't choose on a Monday morning at 11. Maybe you won't choose on a Friday evening after 3, right? So start folding in these constraints, right? Then you start wondering, how should I approach this problem, right? So the reason why again I brought this example up is it's very innocuous, right? If you don't understand the context, to look at data and create an illusionary scoreboard, that never solves the problem, right? One more example. I just picked it off. I think one of the websites I really like is Airbnb, right? So they have terrific sort of context. I would imagine they are amongst companies that claim to have empathy, at least in my view, this is all very subjective, they seem to understand all parts of the moving ecosystem well, right? So if you've been a user for Airbnb for many years, you would know that they gently migrated from saying, hey, a room is available in, I know what, Kedar's house, do you want to put up there? To saying, there's actually a lovely little ski slope, not too far away from where you stay. I think this is the best place for you to not waste time in traffic trying to explore that. Right? Subtle difference, right? So I think where I'm sort of getting at is, for example, I think these are, for example, common ways for you to, illustrate a list of destinations that you want to visit, right? And this is maybe a better way, right? Saying, hey, you can actually do some activity. What could be an even better way? It's not there on the slide. I'm actually looking, half the joy in the session is for me to get some half answers from you guys. Hopefully then we can sort of refine this together. What could be a better way to do this? Recommendations and reviews. If you add, for example, saying 28 reviews, right? What could be an even better way? That's a data point, right? So good. So what else could be a better way? See, the problem with that is it's a little subjective. Unless you say, this is what Jet Airways, the in-flight magazines say, right? 300 kilometers from the nearest airport or whatever, right? What could be an even better way? What resonates with you as an individual? That's why I said, think about it. You want to go to a destination, right? Okay, fine, maybe, I love skiing, you love whatever. desert, etc. I'll just bear with me for a minute. Uh, how do you guys watch stuff on Netflix? How do you know what to watch on Netflix? Trending is one. Trending is one, for example. Maybe it can say, number one uh, destination in Japan, right, or Southeast Asia. You get the drift. What else could it be? The lady over there. Well, I would actually go one step further and say you should anyway do that and shrink it to only those places which are lovely at this time of the year. I am looking at it in summer, right? So if you're going to tell me, I know what, you're going to tell me Chennai in summer, it's not a lot of fun, right? So what else could it be? What moves your cognition? Sorry, what moves your? Sorry? Yeah, it's halfway there. Let's say I'm just extrapolating. Correct. Human psychology says, I don't know if you guys know this, again, these are just insights because I'm truly sort of passionate about this topic, that if you put somebody's photo, right, add a quote unquote testimonial and say I had a lovely time in whatever, etc., right, it resonates with them. But what's the catch there? No, I think one time is enough. Most of these are. What's the catch there? It's fine. I don't want to look at the negative side of it. Correct. I think he hit the nail on the head. Look at everything from the prism of empathy. I'm not going to be able to relate to something if it said, let's say, a fair-skinned person from Colorado said, hey, this is a great skiing destination in Japan. I can't relate to. How is Colorado and how is Japan versus Colorado? I come from whatever, Bilakahalli or whatever, right? So it has to be, the problem with the testimonial is it has to be a relatable testimonial, right? Which brand can you guys, out of your own sort of experiences, has used this very well? Relatable testimonials to break clutter? Pick the ones that top of your mind. TripAdvisor. What else? Dove. All of you would remember that, right? Traditionally, the thought was, hey, we'll get a film star, we'll show great skin. You had real people talk about real problems and said, hey, Sensodyne, right? So look at everything from a prism of what's the stereotype, right? Is the stereotype broadly matching the customer's need or not? Right? So which is why I said, what's the outcome what outcome does a person who's browsing this want? Correct. He actually wants a relatable, actionable review. Do you understand? There's a difference between data about the destination, knowing about lots of stuff to do in that place, versus saying I need an actionable, relatable review, right? It's like Netflix saying recommended for you, right? Versus saying these are great movies in crime genre, right? There's a difference. You aren't quite so sure, even if it is crime genre, that whether it will relate to your sort of needs and moods, right? So that's two. What else does a customer want to know? Right? What else is he anxious about? And what's an unexpressed pain point? And like I said, I don't aim to do this laundry list. I think if all of you can just take home 2 questions from this, but make sure you live through that question, I would consider this reasonably sort of successful, right? So let's go back to the same example, right? Since there seems to be reasonable interest there. What's an unexpressed pain point in those pictures? You guys have all planned your travel tour, etc. Correct. Exactly. Shoes, is this for a family? Is this for a backpacker? Is this on a shoestring budget? Or is this a glorious money no bar sort of experience, right? So how could you fit that in there? You have only one visual. right? You have a 2 by 2, right? With text, it becomes one more dimension, right? With testimonials, it becomes another dimension because it's intangible. How else could you fit that in? Emojis, maybe color code it, right? I'm just saying put a box and say whatever, or put a label and say for a whatever budget friendly, whatever. You get the drift, right? How else could you do it? What else? What else are unexpressed pain points? Tell me more. You guys all have kids and elders, right? What do you worry about? Half the time I'm worried about whether my mother can climb. He has 20 stairs, right? And then I'm like, I don't know, will there be wheelchair, right? For example, I think if you obviously all of you would have traveled on Indigo, right? Indigo is so much easier to climb because it's not a stair. I never thought of it until someone who had this issue told me, right? Maybe they didn't even think of it. It was a byproduct. But if you've actually been correct, yeah. So what else could it be? What else? Okay, what else is a customer anxious about here? These are, let's say, foreign destinations. Safety, more basic. You want to enter a country. Visa. Visa on arrival is such a big thing. All other things being equal. You just choose a country that has visa on arrival because otherwise it's like one big jaunt, right? You have to Xerox 20 documents, give it in a place, they'll give you an interview and they'll say submit your form 16, why is your IT return not matching? For the record, that happens with Schengen visa still, right? They ask you for the moon, right? So all other things being equal, I would rather not go through a Schengen visa, right? It's just way too much hassle. Easy visa for Indians makes it easier. What else? Food, vegetarian, non-vegetarian, elder friendly, public transport, safety. How do you know which ones are important? Maybe you need to personalize, right? How do you then, I don't have an answer for that, but typically, let's say somebody like a TripAdvisor would know based on what you've surfed, what you've browsed, what you've looked for, etc., etc. They'd know whether you have a family, whether you're a luxury loving individual or an experience loving individual, blah, 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 and they'll start showing you more and more recommendations based on that, right? So I think that's, like I said, I think Airbnb had like a bunch of features that they just launched, and some of that I thought was really, really useful, right? Like for example, I've stayed in Airbnb a bunch of times. You always feel a little diffident to ask the guest, right? Not the guest, the host, apologies. What does he do? Is he like a safe individual? Lots of times it just tells you David, right, with a picture of a dog. I don't know whether David has a shotgun with a Doberman in tow, or whether David attends church mass diligently every Sunday, right? I don't know. I'm just saying. So I think one of the things that Airbnb figured is, can you just make this a little more anecdotal about the host, right? Is there any other platform that does this? Have you guys noticed this? Uber does it, not in India but elsewhere. If you have traveled elsewhere, you would know that it'll tell you whatever. Let's say you traveled with Martin, right? It'll tell you Martin is your driver for today. He can speak 7 languages. He's done more than 700 trips with 4-star reviews. And whatever, he's got a family and 2 kids. Depends on what. Why is that important? It's humanizing the person. Study after study. In fact, this is something that we're trying to do. It's still a long way. Study after study shows that the moment you put a name, right, and a face, people no longer think it's Uber. People think I traveled with Martin, right? So the chances that you'll vent and go into a rage against Martin are much lesser than it is of Uber, because you're not thinking of a faceless anthropomorphic sort of entity, right? So that's one. So why is this, for example, important? The second, the one in the middle. You guys, I mean, I presume a lot of you would have stayed in, not stayed, at least searched on Airbnb, right? It'll tell you private room or full residence or whatever, right? The problem with the private room is what? Washroom is one, but usually now I think the well accepted standard is that private room means you have a washroom. What's an issue with the private room? A plywood partition led private room is a private room. Something with a 20 feet concrete wall is also a private room. I've stayed in both these places where I can hear the other person's conversation unintentionally all through the night. And in the other one, even if I died, it would have probably taken them 20 days to uncover the fact that I had died. So that gives you some visual sense as to whether you're staying in a fortress, a makeshift house, a sort of conventional house, and so on and so forth, right? And this becomes even more important in exotic places like tree houses, etc., where you may want to see how the elevation of the house looks, not so much in, let's say, a place like Bengaluru where most of it is just apartments, etc., right? So, what about this? The last one? Is there something that you can observe? What do those stairs tell you? They're not elder friendly. How do you expect a 60-year-old to do a curved stair, climb? In fact, they're not elder friendly, they're elder unfriendly, right? Because elders feel extremely jittery climbing a stair that has sort of striated holes, right? So, what else does it tell you? These are for the record, these are actually observations in your mind. It's just that all of us struggle to manifest these. You looked at this, right? What does it tell you about the house? Sorry? Child safety. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. What else is a problem? From a conventional house that we are all used to, the public space is open, right? You can't cordon it off. You can't cordon off the noise, right? So if you're looking to write a book, this is not a great place to stay, right? But if you're looking to space out after having a drink, this is a good place to stay, because I suspect you'll probably hear some TV and music sporadically all through the night, right? We all understand this, right? But which of them is important and which of them needs to be covered is a hard job from a CX perspective. This is a favorite question of mine. I don't know if you guys know, this is apparently I have this, extraordinary fascination to collect such useless anecdotes. I don't know if they're useful or not. So apparently there was this thing, I think you guys would probably know, there's this underground that runs from Paris to London and whatever. There's this place where it runs under the sea, so obviously it's very expensive to make, right? There's this place where I think the track narrows to just one track on both sides. So trains have to wait, allow the other train to pass, and then sort of fold back into the other track, right? So, and there was constant feedback that people felt extremely claustrophobic, right? During that 5-minute, 10-minute wait. Sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 5 minutes, right? So lots of people said, I feel like I'm boxed in, I can't see anything everywhere. So they obviously said, so there was this proposal to, for example, add a track, but it would have cost like billions of dollars. So some bright fellow had a easier, faster, simpler idea. What was it? Sorry? Painting is one, but it's still, the problem with painting is it's a good start. Like, it still doesn't take away the boredom. It takes away some of the claustrophobia, it doesn't take away the. But mirror works very well in a private space like an elevator, doesn't work in a place where you're seeing 100 people stand along with you. What is the best distraction today in this world? They gave Wi-Fi free. So before it approached that place, they said free Wi-Fi. Please consume your content. Don't disturb us. And no one ever complained again. So what would have been a $10 billion extra cost got solved in $100. So like I said, I mean, I'm sure all of us have heard this apocryphal stories about some Russians using pencil, and whatever, US guys having invented a pen, etc., etc. Right? If you didn't know how to frame the problem, you would have never been able to solve it. The problem is, so this would have gotten reflected in an NPS score, poor NPS score, lots of complaints, etc., etc. Right? The problem would, if he had framed it as how do you solve this problem, this wouldn't have been solved this way. If you had often, you'll have to look at a problem with empathy from the prism of what is the context in which the customer is occupied, what is his alternative, right? If I can't solve the problem meaningfully, can I keep him meaningfully digressed, engaged, well-fed, happy, right? So I think this was apparently, I don't know if it is true, but this is a nice little story I've heard. So I presume there is some sort of merit to it. Right? So how do you improve the tat of security checks in airports? All of us have been through this airport. Sorry? Yeah, DC Yatra still doesn't solve the full beat, right? See, I always get fascinated. Okay, Bangalore doesn't have a metro still, right? So some airports like Delhi, for example, have a metro. You can take a metro to the airport. I often do that because it's much easier. So I go through a security check at the metro. Then I get on the metro. Then I get down. Then I walk. Then I go through a check-in and then a security check again, right? This is just my own harebrained idea. I always think, anyway, everyone who's going into the airport is the one on the metro. Why would you not have the security check in a moving compartment? Just allow me to move from one compartment to another. So that way when I'm traveling, your check is done. And what's the added bonus? People are encouraged to use the metro, right? Instead of you having 1,000 cars to drop them off, right? It's an added incentive because while you're traveling, your security check also gets done. You can have adequate sort of ring fencing to make sure there's no mix and match, etc., right? And I often wonder, some of these large airports, London, Dubai, you have to go through like these vestibules and one tube, etc., and you end up spending so much time, which anyway is of not much use, right? I think too often we just narrowly frame the problem and we look at only the problem as the problem, right? Without looking at why is the customer experiencing this problem? What mind state was the customer in, right? Or is the customer in, and what could be an alternative to this, right? And this is a concept of diminishing returns, right? After a certain point, doing the same thing in the same direction doesn't fetch you much joy. You often have to look at what is an alternative, just like this Wi-Fi example, right? You could have drilled another tunnel into the sea and spent 20 billion, right? But someone would have still complained about it, right? So you have to figure out what is the customer sort of worried about, right? It takes you 20 seconds to know that the real issue is that customers otherwise never complain in a metro because they're used to Wi-Fi and data all the time. The real problem was that was taken away from them. It's like a bone that's been taken away from a dog, right? If a dog is used to chewing on a bone all the time, if you are a dog lover, you would know what happens when you take the bone away forcibly, right? I think the issue is taking away the bone. To misread it as saying the dog is hungry is a lapse of judgment, right? So I think that's that. I don't have much. I mean, there's no point doing a lot. I think the only way you're going to get empathy, right, is similar to how film directors think, right? They are in the scene. They think through the scene. They prime themselves, right? They prime the actors. They prime, all of us have heard these stories about, let's say, how Stanley Kubrick, for example, forced people to star before the scenes if they wanted them to look emaciated and all of that stuff, right? So you have to live through, right? As a customer or the person that you're sort of experiencing, I think the easiest thing in a data-driven, AI-driven world is to look at the problem without assuming that the problem could be wrong. the problem statement could be wrong. You have to expand the problem at the right level of granularity. That is the hardest problem to do, right? And the good part is that no one can sort of replace. I mean, no one can replace a human judgment on that part, right? So the CXOs, most of them, I think, I was fortunate to have worked in Amazon for a few years. I think all credit to Jeff Bezos. He runs like an endless thread in his mind of what is the customer unhappy about. If it's 2-day delivery, make it 1 day, right? You know, et cetera, right? I think it's an acquired sort of practice. It's like a song that lingers in your mind. When it does, it just stays put, but it's not easy to sort of get this off the start. The other last thing I just wanted to tell you is that too often you look at scorecards, right, and you look at them as a truth and a be all and end all of all of this. That's not true. You have to pay careful sort of attention to anecdotal evidence because they often tell you, right? Maybe someone actually said in this metro example that they're bored, right? The issue is not that they're claustrophobic, they're actually bored. They don't have any entertainment, right? That would have probably given you the Wi-Fi idea rather than, the fact. And Kaizen, spirit of continuous improvement, nothing is ever static. What was yesterday is, let's say, 1 hour delivery is now 30 minutes delivery, etc., etc. So I think that's that. I don't have anything more. Happy to sort of open this up in case anyone.